Well, joining us now to discuss, and I'm pretty sure debate this issue, is Jason Brodsky, Policy Director of United Against Nuclear Iran. He joins us from New York. And Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and a Democratic strategist, joins us from Chevy Chase, Maryland. And gentlemen, I'll start with the obvious question, I guess. Is 5 years on, is the Iran nuclear deal still alive? And even if so, is it better off dead? And I'm going to start with you, Joel.
Well, Kalev, it's certainly on life support right now. It is alive to a minor extent, but it is worth resuscitating. And I'll tell you why, because we have seen the alternative to the Iran nuclear deal, which is a slow and steady march towards war. We just heard it on your good report before, where Iran is now engaging with China in a very aggressive partnership. Iran has been, even in President Trump's words, on the march throughout the region for 3.5 years of his presidency, where he's had no Iran policy to speak of except to get rid of what Barack Obama did and hope for the best. So we need to get back to basics. We need to get our allies on board with us as they were during the nuclear deal. We need to get the deal back in place, and we need to deal with Iran's behavior in the region and elsewhere. But we're not going to get anywhere if we just kill this deal outright, as President Trump seems intent on doing.
All right, Jason, the deal, is it worth resuscitating?
No, it's not worth resuscitating, and I think there are alternatives. First of all, the regime is weaker than it has been at any point in its history, and that's what the Maximum Pressure Campaign has achieved. For instance, there's been a report in Reuters that Iran-backed Shia militias in Iraq received $12 to $15 million during when the U.S. was still a member of the JCPOA, $12 to $15 million a month, but now they're receiving $2 to $3 million a month. And that's because of the biting sanctions that have been reimposed. When it comes to the China issue, that deal, that pact, the Iranian regime and the Chinese began conversations on that deal in 2016 when the U.S. was still a member of the JCPOA, when Xi Jinping visited the supreme leader in Iran. So I don't think it's necessarily a commentary on the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA.
Well, Joel, I want you to give you a chance to respond, but do you really actually think, given all that's happened, that even if it wanted to, a Biden administration could revive this deal?
Well, that's the problem that we're at right now, which is that we're in a worse strategic position today than we were when Donald Trump took office. And we have abandoned our allies, the British, the French, the Germans. They all looked at us with aghast. Why would you get out of a good nuclear deal that's stopping Iran from, in a verifiably way, from getting a bomb? So now we're in a deficit. And so these problems in the region, getting them curtailed, we're going to have to rebuild our coalition. And that's what Joe Biden will do, rebuilding our alliances. But that doesn't mean it's easy. But Donald Trump has really put us in the gap. And I think, going to Jason's point, though, which is interesting, is that China didn't want to cut a deal with Iran. China was afraid to cut a deal with Iran. Donald Trump comes in, says, I'm going to enact tough sanctions. And now China is not afraid to cut a deal with Iran. So it's all going backwards. And Donald Trump's policy has made us weaker, isolated, and empowered Iran to go further than it was under Barack Obama, and that's very sad.
Well, Jason, again, on your response, but also address that point that Joel's making, that China maybe wouldn't have gone this far with the deal or allied with Russia to, it looks like, end the weapons embargo with Iran if the deal had not been shot down by the Trump administration.
Well, I think China and Russia have a lot to gain from the deal continuing. First of all, when it comes to the arms embargo, which is expiring 3 short months from now, the Chinese and the Russians have allegedly given Iran proposals to purchase fighter jets. And so I think that they would have been doing that even if the U.S. was still in the deal. That's number one. And number two, in terms of the other point that Joel was making, the Iranians are at their weakest point since really the beginning, since the Iran-Iraq War. And it's important to alliances are very important, no doubt. But the end is satisfying U.S. interests. The end is not, oh, let's all get along in a room. And so I think
that's not why we do alliances. We don't do alliances to be nice and friendly. We do alliances to put pressure. And Iran, we hear this all the time. Oh, Iran is weak. Oh, Iran is weak. Oh, Iran is weak. Iran right now suffered an attack against Qasem Soleimani, and Mike Pompeo said that this was the end. They were deterred, and they haven't been deterred. So I think this policy is definitely going in the direction where Iran is empowered. where they feel free, where they feel like they have new alliances popping up, where the Russians and the Chinese, when we were enacting diplomacy, they were afraid to cut deals with Iran. In fact, they canceled arms sales with Iran. Well, now they're back. So we've helped Russia and China quite well.
Let's hear Jason respond.
The Russians did cancel arms sales with Iran, but that was also because the Security Council had to bless the sale under UN Resolution 2231. And so one of the problems is the arms embargo is going to be eliminated in 3 short months, and that, along with that guardrail. So that's very problematic.
Well, how do you, what about that, Joel? And also, again, I want to just go back to that point. We did see there were aspects of the nuclear deal that were not covered of Iran's military program, its ballistic missile program, its activities elsewhere in this region that certainly concern us here, concern those here in Israel. I mean, how do you respond? Could a deal be made that would include those aspects missing from the JCPOA?
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, Kalev. And the great tragedy for Israel is that Donald Trump walked away from a deal that gave him a strong baseline from which to enact more pressure on those other issues, on Iran's regional behavior, which is dangerous, on Iran's ballistic missile development. He had France saying, please, we'll work with you on those. Don't get rid of the nuclear deal. Well, he scrapped the nuclear deal. There's no baseline of common understanding in the global community about how to address Iran's behavior. And so Israel is on its own right now with this policy and looking to the U.S. to do what? Start a war? I don't think that there's the appetite for that. And so we need to get back to basics. We need to repair our alliances. We need to put pressure on Iran within those alliances, and that's how we're going to enact a change and help protect our ally Israel. This direction right now is leading to a cataclysmic outcome, either a war or potentially an Iranian nuclear bomb.
Well, again, I want to give you a chance to respond, Jason, but there is criticism, I would say even, let's say, from the right, let's say from the John Bolton side of the Republican Party, that the Trump administration may have scrapped the deal, but they didn't follow through with responding more to Iranian aggression in this region.
Well, I think that Iran, the Trump administration has got that strike on Qasem Soleimani was one of the most devastating blows and surprising blows that the regime has ever taken, really. And it was a message. And I think the regime has been deterred as a result of that strike. The Iranians are scrambling to gain some durable oversight mechanism over their partners and proxies in the region. His successor, Ismail Ghani, there is evidence that he is not as charismatic and as able to maneuver around the region as Soleimani has. So I think that it has set back the regime, and there is evidence to that fact in terms of the reduced funding and in terms of the reception that he's having in Baghdad when he visits.
All right. Well, I think, Jason, we're going to let you have the last word on that. But I think, gentlemen, I'm going to point out that today is Bastille Day, the anniversary of the French Revolution. And famously, the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party leader Zhou Enlai was once asked what did he feel was the historical impact of the French Revolution, and his answer was, it is too soon to tell. That was 200 years after. So I think we're going to have to let history, it may be too soon for this debate to reach some kind of final conclusion. Joel Rubin and Jason Brodsky, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.
Thank you.